Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to give it a minute or two more just for a couple of more people to join in, and then we can start with the session. Right. I think Grace is busy recording the session. She will be manning the lobby for us this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining in on this BrainFrame Thursday this afternoon. I am not the usual Vanessa Maresh face that you usually see in the sessions. I am actually Christopher Swart, Commercial Expansion Manager for Salt Essential Information Technology. Ladies and gentlemen, today we would like to draw your attention to a growing concern that has emerged in the digital age. This is called cyber impersonation. In an era where our lives are increasingly intertwined with technology and online platforms, the threat of being impersonated in cyberspace is a serious issue that affects individuals and businesses. As we all know, cyber impersonation refers to the act of assuming another person's identity or creating a fake persona online with the intent to deceive, defraud, or harm others. The perpetrators of these acts can range from opportunistic individuals seeking personal gain or organized criminal network targeting unsuspecting victims for financial and reputational damage. The consequences of these cyber impersonations are far-reaching and can have devastating effects on individuals and their relationships, as well as the integrity of institutions and organizations. Victims experience emotional distress, reputational damage, financial loss, and even legal complications as a result of someone assuming their identity online. Now, we all know while technology advancements have undoubtedly brought numerous benefits and opportunities, they have also created new avenues for malicious actors to exploit. From social engineering techniques to sophisticated hacking methods, cyber impersonation has become a pervasive threat that requires our collective attention and action. SALT has partnered with Sendmarc to address this collective action required. Just as a high-level introduction, Sendmarc ensures that your most important business communication tool is safeguarded against these threats and ensure that you are protected from fraudulent use through proactive monitoring of your email ecosystem. Now, as you can see, Mr. Kieran Frost is on the call. His camera is on. Kieran is the Chief Operations Officer at Sendmarc, and he will be shedding light on this topic this afternoon. So please do sit back, relax, and enjoy this 1-hour session with us. Kieran, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. I'm just going to share my screen and we can take it away. Give it a couple seconds to come through on everybody's side. We'll get started. So I think Chris has done a pretty good job of introducing who we are at Sendmarc. And there's a couple of things that I would like to get right today. My primary objective is that I want everybody that's attending the call to leave here with a sense of understanding very clearly the problem that we're hoping to address. And then obviously I've got a pretty clear set of call to actions for you to take home, whether or not you end up purchasing the Sendmarc product. I think we've got some pretty important messages, and us as custodians of IT in our organizations, it's important that we keep abreast of developments in the market. So I'm going to give you 3 reasons to care, right? I'm going to describe what this problem is. I'm going to explain how this problem is real for you and for your organization, and I'll illustrate a couple of examples of how this plays out in the real world. And hopefully you leave here with a sense that this problem is worth fixing, right? That the problem that I've outlined is significant enough in nature that you end up taking action to solve it, and helping us at Sendmarc to make the internet a safer place. It's very much the value that we try to drive home. I want you to leave this webinar, this session, with some concrete actions that you can take. So I'll be giving you some advice beyond the scope of what we do at Sendmarc, but also very much within our scope. The 3 kind of core actions that I'd like you to take is to know your domain safety score. We'll talk a little bit more about what that is and why it's important in just a little bit. I'm going to leave you with the action that you should add a DMARC record to your domain so that you can start seeing, who out there is using your domain. And we would very much like it if you went on a proof of concept with the Sendmarc team, and obviously in partnership with SALT. So let's dive straight into it. I think it's going to come. It would be rather remiss of me to try and describe this problem to you without providing you some level of proof. So in our holding screen, you would have seen this QR code and the link below. I'm actually also going to just drop this link in the chat. If you follow that link, there's going to be 2 things that are going to happen. The first thing that's going to happen is we're going to ask you for 2 email addresses, your corporate IT and your personal email address. Don't worry, we don't store any of those email addresses. This is purely for demonstration purposes. And what we're going to do is we're going to try and send you an email from yourself. Now, when I say from yourself, I mean using your email address. Now, if that message were to land in your inbox, either of those inboxes, either your corporate or your personal inbox, that indicates a problem. It means that somebody can impersonate you, sending a mail into your environment, which is bad for reasons we'll describe in just a little bit. Or it means that somebody can send an email to somebody outside your environment, a customer, a supplier, somebody else in the rest of the world, just leveraging your brand to do some damage out there. Both of these are problematic for the organization, and we'll go into the reasons why that is. The second thing that this demo tool is going to do for you is it's going to show you a domain safety score. Now, this is a score out of 5, and it's basically a measure of how easy it is to impersonate you. We run an analysis of publicly available information, essentially running a couple queries against your DNS to determine whether or not we can impersonate you, and obviously by extension whether or not attackers or people with malicious intent are able to impersonate you. If you score a 3 out of 5 or less, that means that your domain is available to be impersonated, and there's a problem that you should probably do some thinking about solving, and obviously a problem that we would like to help you solve. So what is this problem? Well, I think it'll come as a surprise to exactly nobody that email is not the most secure platform. It is the most widely used business tool, and remains the biggest kind of method for communication for organizations across the world. That being said, because it's so easy to use and set up and send mail out there in the world, it is the most exploited vector. So about 91% of cybercrime starts with an impersonation email, or starts with an email in general. And there are myriad problems that emerge from this. The first is that impersonations are really easy to pull off. So the tool that that are linked to in the previous slide. That's just one tool that we built. It's really simple to set something like this up. If you don't believe me, send Google send spoofed email free, and you'll have a choice of platforms that allow you to do exactly the type of impersonation that I've just demonstrated to you. And so this means that there's a problem.
Sorry, Mr. Frost. There is
Sure.
somebody in the chat that said they can't hear. I just wanted to confirm whether everybody also can't hear, or some people can't hear.
I mean, can we maybe get some confirmation in the chats from people whether or not they can hear? I think it's on your side, Andreas. Just some quick troubleshooting. Maybe go to more in the top of your Teams settings and then devices, and try and troubleshoot in that way. There's just some free IT support from Sendmarc today. I do hope you managed to come right though. Okay, so as I was saying, really easy to send impersonation emails. And if impersonation is a problem with the way in which emails are sent, interception is a problem with the way in which they are received. So if Grace, for example, were to send me an email, how would I as an individual know that the mail that I'm looking at is the one that that Grace had actually sent? There simply is no way for me as an individual to know that, right? I just know what's written on that email. And so in order to solve these problems, we as IT professionals, traditionally what we've done is we've wrapped our environment with some sort of email security platform. Now, you might be using Microsoft 365 and their Defender platform. You might have invested in a proprietary solution, something like a Mimecast or a Proofpoint. And those platforms serve an incredibly important and critical role in securing our organization, but they do lead to some delivery problems often, right? Because we're all, the entire world is trying to make sure that only legitimate mails land in inboxes. What ends up happening is that often legitimate mails don't, right? Illegitimate mails end up landing in a junk mailbox. And then underpinning all of this is there's just a lack of visibility when it comes to email in general. Now, what do I mean by this? There's really two ways to think about this. The first is that companies themselves, we often find, don't necessarily have a good handle on what platforms they utilize. So what I mean by that is that we as IT, we might be have a very good understanding of what we call the everyday email environment, the Office 365, or maybe you've got an on-site Exchange server or a hosted Exchange, something like that, right? Your everyday email environments. But we as IT don't necessarily have visibility of what marketing is doing from a bulk email purpose. We don't necessarily, have control, visibility of on what's going on with the CRM. Now, all of these platforms may be sending out mail to the rest of the world. So if on the legitimate side, that visibility is opaque, we don't necessarily know all of the tools that our company is utilizing legitimately. When we consider illegitimate, what I mean by that is that, if I'm an attacker and I'm sending a mail impersonating you and I'm sending it to one of your customers, those customers or that particular mail is not passing through any of your systems. And so there's no way for you to know that mail has been sent. Unless, of course, the customer turns around and says, but I've paid that invoice. Or, I got this very strange email from you. And the answer, we're all kind of hoping that it's the latter, right? We don't want people to pay the invoice, because from all of these impersonation emails, there is quite an extensive amount of damage that can occur. The first and kind of most frequent one that we see is obviously deposit fraud. It's the quickest route to cash for attackers. They just get some victim to pay money into their account, and so it's the most exploited vector. What's quite interesting is that we've seen as since 2020, since the pandemic, since more organizations have moved to a kind of remote or a hybrid environment. We've seen a significant uptick in the use of impersonation emails to pull off identity theft. And what the attackers will do is they'll send a mail, let's say from the CIO or from you to your staff, saying, hey, everyone, we've just undergone our, let's say, Office 365 audits. We've had to change our password policy. Please click the below link to change your policy. And then what the attackers are actually doing there is the link will go to what looks like an Office 365 login page. Your users are plugging in their credentials, and the attackers are obviously using those credentials to gain privileged access into your systems. Now, maybe you're turning around, you're saying, hey, Kieran, you don't know what you're talking about. We've got two-factor authentication in place with SAFE. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. So there was a breach at SolarWinds, Cloudflare. I think it was towards the end of last year. And what actually happened there was the attackers did exactly that attack. Cloudflare, being a security provider, had good controls in place. They had two-factor authentication, but the attackers were performing this attack in a live manner. So as soon as the users plugged in their credentials, the attackers knew to throw up a one-time prompt. The users used the second factor, their cell phone. They plugged in the one-time PIN that their cell phone gave them, and the attackers did the same, gaining access to the systems. So there's been this massive uptick in the use of these types of mails to pull off identity theft. We also see that obviously, since time immemorial, impersonation mails have been used to distribute not only ransomware, but kind of really any payload that you want to see fit. And obviously, if your brand is being leveraged to pull off these attacks, if an attacker is utilizing your domain to send a mail to one of your customers, the reputational cost associated with this is enormous. And we're going to talk about, a South African example, but a very important example of this in just a little bit. So it's a good kind of question to ask. Well, how is this happening? And the answer is that impersonation is very much baked into how email works. More and more we've seen workloads shifting to the cloud, and there's really good reasons why you might do that. But this makes the work of kind of sifting the good from the bad very difficult, because as I've mentioned, impersonation is baked into how email works. Let me use an example. So let's say we want to send out a bulk newsletter to all of our customers. So we use a platform like MailChimp to do so. Now, in order for MailChimp to send that newsletter to our customers, they actually have to impersonate our domain, right? We want this, we're representing our brand out in the market, so MailChimp impersonates our domain and sends that mail to our customers. What's really important about that is that MailChimp's infrastructure isn't hosted in our location. So what we've seen is that as customers start to make use of more and more cloud-based platforms, legitimate mail is being sent from more locations around the world. Now, the problem is that attackers have access to the same platforms. They're able to send mail from anywhere in the world, and they're making use of the same techniques technically to pull off the work that they're trying to do. So it becomes very difficult for these stakeholders in the middle here to pass out the legitimate services from the bad. Now, I think what's really important here is that we understand the difference between what I'm describing and what email security platforms have traditionally dealt with. So if I'm an attacker and I'm sending a mail from your domain and I'm sending it to your staff member, it's very likely that you've gone and invested in a anti-spam solution. It might be, as I mentioned, something like Microsoft's Defender platform. It could be Sophos, Mimecast, Proofpoint. There's a whole laundry list of proprietary solutions out there that are meant to protect your staff against impersonations. However, if I'm an attacker and I'm sending a mail, from my infrastructure to one of your customers or your suppliers or somebody else in the rest of the world, there is quite simply, nothing stopping me from doing so. Where the attack is going to your staff members, sure, your platform, it absolutely has a role to play and is a critical part of protecting your environments against, against that attack. But if the attacker is sending a mail to one of your customers, well, the fact of the matter is that regardless of what solution you've invested in here, it has no means of preventing that delivery. And that's really what we're here to talk about. What happens when a mail is sent to somebody outside of our network using our domain? To illustrate that point, let's talk about a judgment that happened in South Africa in January of 2023 rather. Really, really important case. And it's also very illustrative of the way that these attacks play out. So very, very useful and transferable kind of across borders. So the kind of really important facts of the case are this, right? So there is a woman, Elizabeth Harwarden, and she wants to buy a house in Johannesburg. She wants to pay cash for the house, and she selects ENS Africa, the big law firm, as her conveyancer. Now, during the transaction, ENS Africa, in inverted commas, sends her banking details to pay the 5.5 million rand that was due for the house into one of their bank accounts. She pays it and unwittingly hands 5.5 million rand to an attacker. Now, what's really important about this case from a South African legal perspective is that the High Court actually rules that the party that's going to bear this loss is ENS Africa, and they rule that for a couple of reasons, which we'll get into now. So basically, what they describe is that ENS Africa didn't do three things. One, they potentially shouldn't have had such sensitive communications running over email in the first place. Two, they didn't do enough to warn their customer about the dangers of around cybersecurity in general. And three, and most importantly, they didn't put in place common sense best practices, namely SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. And we'll talk about those in general. What's really interesting about this case is that it's actually a judgment around which victim gets to bear the cost, because impersonation attacks are kind of unique in the fact that there's really, it's a 2-for-1 in terms of crime. You get to rob two people at the same time. So Elizabeth Harwarden, victim number one, let's say, wins the case and gets paid back her 5.5 million rand, and ENS Africa is ordered to make that payment. But what's really interesting about this when we take a step back is that we can be on either end of this equation, right? We could be an Elizabeth Harwarden, and I say this as businesses, we can be an Elizabeth Harwarden and we can be an ENS Africa if you just understand how the attackers pull off this type of attack. So generally speaking, what we find is that these attacks follow the same kind of broad methodology. Now, if you've been in cybersecurity for any period of time, you'll know that they don't always follow this, but it's a very, very common playbook that we see. So what will happen is the attackers will gain access to the individual's account. So in this case, the individual's account is Elizabeth Harwarden's account. The way they gain access to that, there's myriad ways that they can do so. Very, very common one is her credentials get leaked. Credentials get leaked on another platform and she reuses her passwords. And so, that's just one means that the attackers might use to gain access to her account. So once they're in that account, they set up a rule that basically forwards all communication. Typically, it's not a forward in the kind of normal sense of the word. What they'll do is they'll add all inbound mail to an RSS feed, and they'll read those RSS feeds. What's really important about that is that they do that because they don't want to actually sit in that mailbox. It's way they've got access to many, many thousands of mailbox in many cases around the world. And so they're unlikely to just kind of sit in a single mailbox and monitor it day in, day out. But if they forward it to an RSS feed, or an RSS feed rather, they can just see the communications as they roll in. And then they wait for an opportunity. So in Elizabeth's case, that's obviously a mail comes in from ENS Africa saying, please pay 5.5 million rand into this bank account, and they strike. So what do? They delete the mail that is in that mailbox. They get back into the mailbox, they delete that mail, and what they do is they send a mail that is from ENS Africa. So it looks like it comes from ENS Africa. It's got their domain. It's using their email address. They mirror exactly the content that ENS Africa uses. They've just got a different set of banking details attached. Now, this is a story that we've seen play out again and again and again. And there's a number of things that you can do to protect against this, because as I said, you could be an Elizabeth Harwood as an organization, or you can be an ENS Africa. And it's important that we understand that there is no single bullet when it comes to cybersecurity. So we need to think about how we attack and how we stop both sides of this equation. So let's talk about firstly the kind of Elizabeth Harwood and the individual's accounts and how we can protect against that. So there's really two things that we can do as administrators to protect against attackers gaining access to our users' accounts, what's commonly known as business email compromise. Many of them you would have heard before, right? Enable two-factor authentication. I know that there's always a user who finds it very complicated or whatever. Unfortunately, that user must learn. It's 2023. You're putting your organization at risk by not enforcing that as just a standard policy. You need to monitor for risky logins and external forwards. Most kind of modern email platforms give you tools that make this a relatively simple thing to do. Many of those email platforms also just allow you to set policies that do not allow for things like external forwards, attaching mails to RSS feeds, locking down those common vectors. And then in order to stop yourself from being an ENS Africa, who basically allowed their domain to be impersonated, there's one simple step that you can take, and that's enabling DMARC. Now, I've made mention of DMARC a couple of times. I think it's important that we kind of get an understanding of what that is. But what's really important to understand now is that, these attacks happen incredibly often. And the reason we don't hear about them, all the time is these three things that you see on the screen now, right? So whenever an attack happens and somebody pays over money into a fraudulent bank account, as an example, there's obviously a lot of shame that comes with that. There's a lot of kind of blaming yourself, right? And nobody wants to admit that they got. So that shame often leads to silence. We're not going to talk about that. We're not going to tell people about this terrible thing that's befallen us. And for the longest time, what we've done is we've just accepted that this is the way it is, that impersonations are just the cost of doing business. And that's fundamentally not the truth. There are common sense steps that we can take, right? We can lock down our environments against business email compromise, and we can implement things like DMARC, which are going to stop and lock down or stop those attackers from being able to send mails purportedly from us. What does it start with? It starts with understanding where you are. Now, earlier, I included that link. That link allows you to as I mentioned, it sends an impersonation, and it also produces a score. Now, that score is meant to tell you how protected your particular domain is against impersonation. What we do is we run a number of queries against your DNS, and we produce the score out of 5. If you score a 3 out of 5 or less, your domain is not currently protected against these types of attacks, right? Many of you will likely score a 2 out of 5. Please don't feel that this is an indictment on the work that you've done thus far. This is an additional tool that you need to add to your toolbox, and this merely indicates that there's more work to be done. But the kind of headline from this is that your domain is available to be impersonated, and really would love to help you in the process of protecting your domain against these types of attacks. So what does Sendmarc actually do? Well, we provide a software platform. That software platform is meant to simplify how DMARC works. So let me explain this in a bit more detail. DMARC is a platform, or DMARC is a standard not developed by Sendmarc. It's developed by a consortium of big players in the email space, and it fundamentally does two things. For those of you that are interested, for those of you that love to know, what the acronym stands for, it's Domain Messaging Authentication Reporting and Conformance. Doesn't mean much. It's just a word jumble to me. What's more important are these two things that DMARC really pulls off. So the first thing that it does is when you publish that DMARC record up in the DNS, you're telling the internet at large, whenever anybody receives a mail from you, they need to tell us about it. So because it's the recipients around the world that are reporting this mail that's being sent to them, they're going to tell us when a mail comes from your legitimate infrastructure, but they're also going to tell us when a mail comes from an illegitimate source. So the first thing that DMARC gives us is this global visibility on how our domain is being utilized. The second thing that it gives us is control, right? It allows us to identify, once we've gone through that process of identifying our legitimate services, it allows us to reject every mail that doesn't come from legitimately from our organization. So Sendmarc's roles is in providing a software platform that can take those reports, those thousands of reports that get sent to us from recipients around the world, and turn them into something actionable, right? What do I mean by that? Well, the reports, when you switch them on, it's XML packets of data, it's IP addresses, and it's the performance of mails against some technical standards. It's not really something that a human being can do something with. Our software platform turns that from a bunch of XML data into something that a human being can actually action. We then also provide, in partnership with the team itself, professional services to get this right? So I mentioned that DMARC requires us to signal to the internet which platforms are legitimate. The professional services element is really there to make sure that that work actually gets actioned, because we don't want to be exercising control before we're able to make those signals to the internet, right? Because in that scenario, we're blocking legitimate mail, and that's obviously a problem. So the professional services team is really there to make sure that you get to a fully protected state, and that you get to that state without putting your environment at any risk. And lastly, we provide training and certification for anybody within your organization that would be interested in attaining that level of knowledge around the process and around the platform. So if I could, just as a last thought, before we kind of wrap up here, we have one or two more slides. The addition of DMARC is something that we at Sendmarc take extremely seriously. Obviously, we think that if every organization implemented a DMARC record into their domain, the world at large would be a safer place from these types of attacks. And so whether you do it with us or with another DMARC provider, we think it's a net win to the world if you actually take that action. So please do take this seriously, and please, do add a DMARC record to your DNS. We'd love to, engage with you if you're interested in doing some business with us. We'd love to engage with you. Add our DMARC record to your DNS, and run an analysis on your domain for a period of 2 weeks. That POC period, that proof of value period, obviously comes at no cost or obligation. It's it's not going to break your email. The way that it works is that we effectively put the DMARC policy in a reporting only mode. So we're not going to break your email. We're not going to get in your mail flow. It's not complicated or onerous. And we're be able to show you the value of DMARC in a very tangible way to your organization. We are only focused on DMARC. I think that it's it's to our credits, because it means that we're able to deliver an exceptionally high level of service to our customers. And we share the slide not to pat ourselves on the back, but just to give you the sense that we're an organization that takes getting this stuff right very seriously. And though we've got some pretty significant organizations on the screen, we've also got 2-person travel agencies, and we treat them the same in terms of delivering that high level of service. So, if you do decide to partner with us, I can say so very confidently that you're in safe hands. And that's pretty much it from me. I just want to thank you for making the time. I know that it's always tricky to make time in the diary, so I really do appreciate it. I hope that if nothing else, it's been an interesting session for you. I'm going to pause now. I haven't checked the chat, so I'll have a look at the chat and see if there's any questions. But I'll pause now and see if there are any questions. If you do have questions, please feel free to Can you hear me? Can I just see a response in the chat if you can hear me?
Hi, Kieran. Yes, we can still hear you.
Awesome. So I'd like to just open up to questions.
All right, I'll just allow Mike in case maybe people are also not able to type. I'll just allow Mike for everyone.
It sounds like Siegfried nearly asked the question there. Okay, Grace, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you want to wait a little bit longer. I do think, if you did run that impersonation, we'll chat to the team at Salt. If you're interested in running that analysis, it seems that there's a couple of people that are. I can see that Chris ran a poll. We'll be reaching out to you to run that analysis. But again, just thank you so much for the time. I really do appreciate it. And from the team at Sendmarc, thank you very much. Grace, Chris, I'm not sure if there's anything that you'd like to say in closing.
Kieran, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this informative session. Indeed, much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do not have any questions for Kieran at the moment, I see that 83% of you have requested that we run the analysis. To run the analysis for you. We will be reaching out from a commercial expansion point of view. So please do drop us your emails via sales@salt.na for more information on this. With this, ladies and gentlemen, if there are no questions, none that I can see. Kieran, thank you so much to you and the Sendmarc team. Ladies and gentlemen, please do enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we look forward to the next BrainFrame Thursday.
Cheers, everyone. Have a good day.
Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.